The rain came hard that night, hammering the tin roof of the old ranch house like an unrelenting drumbeat. Wind howled through the open plains, bending the grass flat, rattling the wooden shutters as if trying to pry them loose. Inside, a single oil lamp flickered on the table, casting trembling shadows that swayed across the walls. Ethan Cole sat by the window, his weathered hands clasped, eyes distant and hollow. The storm outside was loud, but not louder than the silence that filled the room between him and his wife. Clara sat across from him, her fingers mending a torn saddle strap, each stitch slow, deliberate, almost mechanical. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The air between them carried the weight of everything left unsaid, their son's name, his laughter, the day he didn't come back from the ride. Ethan's gaze lingered on the framed photograph over the mantel. A boy no older than 16 smiled there, a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head, sunlight spilling over his shoulders. Daniel. He'd been the kind of son every father hoped for, fearless, kind, restless in the best ways. The ranch had been his kingdom. Now it was a graveyard of memories Ethan couldn't escape. Clara's quiet sigh broke the rhythm of the rain. She didn't look up when she said softly, "You should get some rest." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Can't sleep in storms," he muttered, staring at the dark horizon. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. Every storm since that night felt like an echo of the one that took Daniel away. Then, through the thunder, came a sound unlike the rest. A sharp, frantic neigh tore through the wind. Ethan froze, eyes narrowing. Clara's sewing needle slipped from her hand. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan was already standing, reaching for his coat. "Probably a stray," he said, though his voice carried the rough edge of uncertainty. Lantern in hand, he stepped into the storm. The wind bit at his face, cold and angry, as he crossed the muddy yard toward the open pasture. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a flash of movement near the fence line. A horse, pale under the rain, stumbled and fell hard into the mud. Ethan's heart jumped. He ran, boots sinking deep, mud clinging to his legs. The horse tried to rise but collapsed again, breath coming in shuddering gasps. Its flank was slick with blood where barbed wire had torn through. Its eyes rolled, wild and terrified. Ethan slowed, holding the lantern high, his breath visible in the cold air. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice trembling with both fear and instinct. "Easy now." The animal flinched, but didn't move. Ethan crouched, running a hand gently along its neck. The horse was shaking, drenched, and freezing. He could feel its heart pounding beneath the skin, frantic but alive. Behind him, Clara's voice broke through the rain. "Ethan." She was running toward him, dress soaked, hair plastered to her face. She stopped short when she saw the horse, her eyes widening. "Oh my God," Ethan looked up at her. "He's hurt bad. Help me get him to the stable." Together they pulled, pushed, and pleaded, guiding the animal through the gate, each step heavy and slow. By the time they reached shelter, both were trembling. Ethan closed the stable doors against the wind, the lantern light trembling across the straw-strewn floor. Clara fetched a bucket of water, her hands shaking as she tore strips of cloth. For the first time in months, they worked together without speaking, each movement instinctive. Ethan cleaned the wound, biting back memories of doing the same for Daniel's horse years ago. The horse's breath hitched, then steadied as Clara pressed a warm cloth against its side. "He's a fighter," she whispered. Ethan nodded, brushing wet hair from his forehead. So was Daniel. The name hung in the air like smoke. Clara's eyes softened, pain flickering through them. Maybe he found his way here for a reason. Ethan swallowed hard. Or maybe it's just another reminder of what we couldn't save. The horse shifted, ears flicking toward Ethan's voice. There was something strange in its eyes, not just fear, but a kind of awareness, a recognition that unsettled him. He stepped back, watching as Clara stroked its neck. "He must have come from somewhere," she said quietly. "No brand, no saddle." Ethan ran his fingers along the horse's side, tracing faint scars. "He's been through hell." The rain eased outside, leaving behind the slow drip of water from the eaves. For the first time all night, the silence didn't feel as heavy. Clara fetched a blanket and covered the horse's shivering body. Ethan sank onto a bale of hay, exhaustion seeping into his bones. Hours passed before the horse finally closed its eyes. Clara leaned against Ethan's shoulder, and for a moment he didn't pull away. The smell of wet earth and hay filled the air. The lantern burned low, its flame trembling. Ethan's thoughts drifted back to his son, the way Daniel used to whistle to calm the horses, the joy in his eyes when he raced across the fields. He wondered what Daniel would have said if he were here now. Maybe he would have named this horse, laughed about finding something wild in the middle of a storm. But Daniel wasn't here, and Ethan didn't know how to fill that silence anymore. When Clara finally went back to the house, Ethan stayed behind. The storm had passed, leaving behind a ghostly calm. Moonlight spilled through the cracks in the stable wall, pale and cold. The horse stirred, lifting its head slightly, ears twitching. Ethan stepped closer, whispering, "You've got fight in you, don't you?" The horse blinked, and in that moment, Ethan swore it understood. He reached out, resting a hand gently against its neck. The heartbeat beneath his palm was steady and strong. "You rest now. We'll figure out where you belong in the morning." He turned to leave, but the horse made a low, throaty sound, a sound almost like protest. Ethan paused, frowning. The animal's gaze fixed toward the far hills beyond the ranch, where fog still clung to the ridges. For a second, it seemed to be listening to something distant, something only it could hear. Ethan followed its gaze, but saw only darkness. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. The horse didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared. Ethan felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. The storm might have ended, but something else had begun, something he couldn't name yet. He looked back once more before closing the stable door. The horse shifted again, eyes still fixed on the horizon. Outside, the wind carried a faint, rhythmic sound, like distant water flowing over stone. Ethan hesitated on the porch, looking toward the hills where the fog glowed faintly under the moon. He didn't know why, but a single thought settled deep in his mind, quiet and insistent. Tomorrow, he'd follow where that horse wanted to go. He didn't realize it yet, but the path that began with a wounded animal in the rain would lead him and Clara to something far more powerful than either of them could imagine, a secret buried in the heart of the land itself, waiting for them to be ready to find it. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something stir inside him that he thought had died with his son. Hope. The morning broke with a veil of mist rolling low across the open fields, soft and silver in the rising sun. The storm had scrubbed the world clean, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and the rhythmic dripping of water from the stable roof. Ethan stood at the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, eyes on the horizon. The land stretched endlessly before him, familiar, yet heavy with the quiet promise of something unseen. Inside the stable, the injured horse stirred. The animal's coat glistened under the slant of light, every breath a quiet testament to survival. Clara was already there, humming under her breath as she replaced the bandage on the horse's leg. Ethan watched her for a moment before stepping closer. "How's he doing?" he asked, voice rough from a night of little sleep. Clara looked up, strands of hair falling over her face. "Better," she said softly. "He's strong, stronger than he should be after what he's been through." Ethan crouched beside the horse, his hand brushing along the animal's neck. The horse turned his head slightly, meeting Ethan's eyes with a calm that felt unsettlingly deliberate. It wasn't just an animal's gratitude he saw there, it was awareness, as if the creature carried some unspoken message he was trying to understand. Clara followed his gaze. "He keeps looking toward the hills," she said. "Every time I open that door, he faces that way, like he's waiting for something." Ethan said nothing. His mind was still tangled in the memory of the night before, the way the horse had fixated on the distant ridge, the faint sound of rushing water carried on the wind. He tried to shake it off, but the thought lingered like a whisper that refused to fade. After breakfast, Clara suggested taking the horse outside to stretch his legs. Ethan hesitated. The injury was still raw, the muscles still weak, but something about the animal's restless energy convinced him. They led him out into the open yard, sunlight spilling over the wet grass. Spirit, that was the name Clara had given him while Ethan slept, walked with a limp at first, but straightened gradually, each step more confident than the last. When he reached the fence, he stopped. His ears flicked forward. His head lifted. Ethan followed his line of sight toward the distant hills. The same direction. Always the same. Clara placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "Maybe we should follow," she said quietly. He turned to her, startled. "Follow him. Into the hills." Her expression was calm, but certain. "He came from there. Maybe there's something we're supposed to see." Ethan wanted to laugh, to tell her it was foolish, just a horse's instinct. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself looking at the animal again. Spirit's eyes were fixed, unwavering, the way Daniel's used to look before a race. That same spark of conviction. It pulled at something deep inside him. By noon, Ethan had saddled one of their older horses, packed water and food, and tied Spirit's halter gently to his saddle horn. Clara prepared another horse for herself, ignoring the flicker of doubt in Ethan's eyes. The last time they had ridden together beyond the ranch had been the day before Daniel's accident. The thought tightened Ethan's chest, but when Clara mounted and gave him a small, brave smile, he felt the knot loosen. They set off slowly, the wind brushing their faces, the sound of hooves muffled against damp soil. Spirit led the way, moving with uncanny purpose. The land shifted from open pasture to rocky slope, where the grass thinned and the air grew cooler. Hawks circled high above, their cries echoing faintly. For the first hour, neither spoke. It felt wrong to disturb the silence, as if the world itself were holding its breath. When they stopped by a narrow creek to rest, Clara dismounted and knelt to fill a canteen. "Do you remember when Daniel used to bring us flowers from this valley?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft, almost tentative. Ethan nodded, staring at the flowing water. "Wild sunflowers," he said. He'd come home covered in dirt, proud as if he'd conquered the world. "He said the hills were magic," Clara whispered. "That they hid something special, something only brave hearts could find." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He said a lot of things." She looked up at him. And most of them were true. Spirit lifted his head suddenly, nostrils flaring. He turned and began walking upstream, tugging gently at his lead. Ethan frowned but didn't stop him. The horse's ears flicked forward, steps steady, eyes alert. The creek wound through a grove of birch trees, sunlight filtering through the leaves like shifting coins of gold. Then Spirit stopped beside a half-buried object in the dirt. Ethan dismounted, kneeling beside it. His fingers brushed away the damp soil until a faint metallic glint appeared, a small silver pendant shaped like a wave inside a circle. The breath caught in his throat. Clara gasped. "That's Daniel's," Ethan finished quietly. He turned the pendant in his hand, recognizing the handmade charm his son used to wear. It was impossible. They had searched every inch of the plains after the accident. How could it be here, miles away from where he'd fallen? Clara knelt beside him, tears trembling in her eyes. "Ethan, this can't be coincidence. He's leading us somewhere." Ethan closed his fist around the pendant, heart pounding. "Or someone found it and dropped it. Maybe." "Maybe nothing," Clara interrupted gently. "You can feel it too." He wanted to deny it, to reject the impossible, but every instinct told him there was more to this. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the distant murmur of water, faint but steady. Spirit raised his head again, looking in the same direction. Without another word, Ethan mounted up. They followed the sound through dense brush and uneven ground. The landscape grew wilder with every turn, untouched by time. Branches scratched against their coats, and the air filled with the smell of pine and wet stone. As they climbed higher, clouds gathered again, gray and heavy, the light dimming to a muted silver. Spirit's pace slowed, his breathing heavy but determined. When they emerged from a thicket, the world opened before them, a valley wrapped in mist, rimmed with cliffs that shimmered faintly under the fading sun. Ethan reined in his horse, stunned by the sight. "I've lived here my whole life," he said under his breath. "I've never seen this place." Clara looked around, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe it was never meant to be found, until now. Spirit moved forward again, pausing at the edge of a steep incline. Below, through the mist, something glistened faintly, an unnatural brightness against the stone. Ethan dismounted and stepped closer, squinting. The sound of rushing water grew louder, echoing from somewhere below the cliffs. He turned back to Clara, heart racing. "There's something down there." A sudden clap of thunder cracked across the sky, echoing through the valley. Spirit flinched, pulling at his rope. Ethan grabbed the halter, steadying him. "Easy, boy, easy." But the horse was agitated now, eyes wide, muscles tense. Another flash of lightning split the clouds, revealing for a heartbeat the shimmer of what looked like cascading water deep in the ravine. Ethan stared, chest tightening. It wasn't just a stream. It was a waterfall hidden behind layers of rock and fog. The sound of it filled the air now, wild and hypnotic. Clara joined him, awe softening her face. "Ethan," she whispered, "this is what he was looking for. The waterfall Daniel talked about." Ethan's throat worked as he looked down at the pendant in his palm. The same symbol, a circle with waves, etched faintly into the charm. He turned to Spirit, whose breathing had steadied again, gaze locked on the hidden falls. The horse stood perfectly still, rain beginning to fall around them in soft, shimmering drops. Clara reached for Ethan's hand. "We have to see it. Tomorrow morning, we'll climb down." He looked at her, at the faint light breaking through the clouds, and nodded slowly. "Tomorrow." Spirit lowered his head, the wind brushing his mane like a quiet benediction. The storm moved farther east, leaving behind a low rumble that faded into silence. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, not peace, not yet, but direction. As he looked toward the veil of mist hiding the waterfall, he couldn't help but feel that whatever waited there would either heal them or break them completely. The morning arrived pale and cold, the air heavy with the scent of rain and stone. Mist clung to the valley like a living thing, curling around the rocks and dissolving into ghostly tendrils that drifted upward toward the ridges. Ethan stood at the edge of the cliff, eyes fixed on the distant shimmer where the hidden waterfall roared behind the fog. It sounded close yet unreachable, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Beside him, Clara tightened the strap of her satchel, her face calm but determined. Spirit stood between them, his coat still damp from a night's drizzle, his breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. The horse's gaze was fixed on the same point below, unwavering. "We'll take it slow," Ethan said quietly, adjusting the rope around his shoulder. "The rocks are slick. Stay behind me." Clara nodded, her fingers brushing his arm briefly before she followed his lead. The descent was steep, the path narrow and uncertain. Loose stones tumbled down into the fog with every cautious step. The air grew louder, filled with the deep rumble of water colliding with rock. Spirit followed without hesitation, his movements sure despite the uneven ground, as if he knew the way. Halfway down, Ethan paused to catch his breath. His pulse beat hard in his chest, not from exertion, but from the unshakable feeling that they were walking toward something inevitable. He looked back at Clara. Her face was pale, but her eyes held the same quiet resolve that had carried them through every hardship before. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. When they finally reached the bottom, the sound of the falls enveloped them completely. Mist beaded on their skin, cool and fine as breath. The waterfall loomed ahead, bursting through a cleft in the rock face like liquid glass. Sunlight filtered through the veil of spray, scattering into shards of color. It was beautiful, wild and untouched, a secret kept by time itself. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, an ache he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since Daniel's death. Clara stepped forward first, drawn as if by invisible hands. She reached out, her fingers grazing the mist. "It's real," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All this time, I thought he was imagining it." Ethan followed her gaze to the small opening behind the falling water, a dark hollow barely visible through the spray. "There's something back there," he said, his tone sharp with curiosity. "Stay here. I'll check it." She shook her head. "We go together." He didn't argue. They moved side by side, stepping through the shallow pool that gathered at the base of the falls. The cold water bit at their legs, but the pull of discovery drowned out discomfort. Spirit stood at the edge of the pool, ears twitching, his posture tense, yet unafraid. As they slipped behind the curtain of water, the sound softened into a muffled hum. The space beyond was a shallow cave, dimly lit by the faint glow filtering through the cascade. The air was thick and damp, carrying the scent of moss and old earth. Clara lifted the lantern Ethan had brought, its light revealing walls streaked with mineral lines and faint carvings, circles and waves etched into the stone. Ethan's heart quickened, the same symbol from Daniel's pendant. Clara's voice was barely audible. He found this place. Ethan took a step deeper. The floor of the cave was uneven, scattered with fallen stones and fragments of old wood. Near the back, half buried beneath a layer of dirt, something metallic glinted faintly. He knelt, brushing away the soil until his fingers struck a small tin box, rusted and worn. It was the kind of box Daniel used to keep his trinkets in, stones, old coins, bits of metal he'd found on his rides. Ethan's breath caught. He opened it slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside were a few photographs, edges curled from moisture. The first showed Daniel standing by the corral, sunlight spilling over his face. Behind him, Spirit, or a horse that looked almost identical, stood in the same posture he'd seen 100 times before. Beneath the photos lay a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the pages soft and faded, but Daniel's handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan's hands trembled as he flipped through it. The entries were brief, scattered thoughts written in a teenager's uneven script. Notes about the land, sketches of the hills, lines of excitement about finding the place with the hidden water. Near the end, a final entry caught his eye. "I'll show them soon. They'll understand. This place isn't just water, it's peace. It's where everything feels alive again." Ethan's throat tightened. The words blurred as he stared at the page. Clara knelt beside him, her fingers tracing the ink. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely. "He wanted to bring us here," she said softly. "He wanted us to see what he found." Ethan closed the book gently and pressed it against his chest. "And we never let him." His voice broke. "We told him to stay close, to stop wandering, to be careful. I thought I was protecting him." Clara shook her head, her hand finding his. "You were scared, Ethan. So was I. But he wasn't meant to be caged. You know that." The sound of the waterfall filled the silence between them. Ethan's tears mixed with the mist on his cheeks, salt blending with water. He looked toward the cave entrance, where the shifting light made the air shimmer like a living thing. Spirit appeared at the opening, his figure framed by silver rain. The horse's eyes caught the dim light and seemed almost to glow. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared. Something deep within him, something closed and cold for too long, began to thaw. "He must have found Spirit here," he murmured. "Maybe they were together that day. Maybe Spirit survived when Daniel didn't." Clara rose slowly, moving toward the horse. She rested her hand against his face, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Then maybe he came back to finish what Daniel started." Ethan looked down at the journal one last time before slipping it into his jacket. The waterfall thundered behind him, the mist curling around them like a benediction. For the first time since their son's death, the weight on his chest eased. He felt Daniel everywhere, in the water, in the wind, in the quiet strength of the horse that had led them here. As they stepped out from a cave, sunlight broke through the mist, scattering across the valley in waves of gold. Spirit lifted his head, mane rippling, his body silhouetted against the glowing falls. Clara turned to Ethan, her eyes bright despite the tears. "He's still with us," she whispered. Ethan took her hand. "He always was. We just couldn't see it." They stood together in silence, letting the light wash over them. The sound of the waterfall roared behind, not as a reminder of loss, but as a song of return. Spirit snorted softly and turned toward the path that led upward, his body strong and sure again. Ethan looked once more at the glimmering water, at the cave where the past had finally let go of its pain. As they followed Spirit back up the ridge, Ethan felt something shift deep inside, a sense of peace he hadn't believed possible. Each step away from the waterfall felt like a step toward life again. And though he didn't look back, he knew that the place behind them would always remain, a secret sanctuary where grief had turned into grace, and where a lost son's dream had finally come home. By the time they reached the top, the mist was lifting. The valley stretched out before them, alive with color, and in the distance the waterfall glimmered like a thread of silver weaving through the earth. Spirit stopped and looked back once, as if to make sure they understood. Ethan smiled faintly, his voice a whisper carried by the wind. "We understand." And as they began the long ride home, the echo of the water followed them, a steady, eternal promise that some bonds, no matter how tested by loss, never truly break. The road back to the ranch stretched long and winding beneath the setting sun. The air was warm now, the scent of rain replaced by dust and sage. Ethan rode ahead, his posture straighter than it had been in years, though fatigue lined his face. Spirit's hooves struck the earth with quiet rhythm, each step sure and powerful. Clara followed close behind, the small tin box from the cave secured in her saddlebag. Neither spoke much, but silence between them no longer felt like distance, it felt like peace. By the time the ranch came into view, twilight had settled. The house looked smaller somehow, framed by the fading orange light. The fields beyond glowed faintly, dotted with the soft movement of horses grazing in the dusk. For years, that sight had brought Ethan little more than exhaustion. Tonight, though, it felt like coming home. When they dismounted, Spirit remained still, his eyes reflecting the dying sun. Ethan ran a hand down his neck, feeling the warmth beneath the coat, the steady pulse of life. "You did good," he murmured. Spirit flicked his ears, as if in acknowledgement. Clara came to stand beside him, her hand resting gently on Spirit's shoulder. "He's changed," she said softly. "There's something different in him now. Calmer, like he knows his purpose." Ethan nodded. Maybe he always did. We were just too blind to see it. They turned toward the house, but Spirit stayed near the fence, watching them go. It felt as though he belonged both to them and to something greater, like the valley itself had loaned him out for a purpose now fulfilled. Inside, the house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Clara lit a lamp, and its golden glow cast gentle shadows across the wooden walls. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, glimmering like tiny stars. Ethan sat at the table and pulled the small journal from his coat. He placed it between them, careful not to damage the fragile pages. For a long moment, they just looked at it. The worn leather cover seemed almost alive under the light. Then Clara opened it again, flipping to the last entry. Her voice trembled slightly as she read Daniel's words aloud. "Peace isn't a place you find. It's something you carry back with you." She closed the book slowly, her fingers tracing the edge. "He knew what we didn't." Ethan exhaled deeply. He did. His voice was low, steady now. And maybe Spirit was how he sent it back to us. They sat in silence, the quiet thick, but comforting. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, a low and living warmth. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't flinch from the closeness. He simply rested there, letting the rhythm of her breathing match his own. Outside, the wind shifted. Spirit's silhouette passed briefly across the window, a shadow in motion, powerful and unbroken. Ethan watched, his heart swelling with both grief and gratitude. "Do you think he'll stay?" Clara asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is we're not lost anymore." The night deepened, stars spreading across the sky like scattered embers. When the lamp finally burned low, they climbed the stairs in quiet companionship. Before he slept, Ethan found himself listening, not for ghosts, not for regret, but for the faint, distant echo of falling water. It seemed to whisper through the wind, soft and eternal. Morning came bright and clear. The world felt cleaner somehow, renewed. Ethan rose early, pulling on his boots and coat, the kind of calm determination in his movements that hadn't been there before. When he stepped outside, Spirit was already waiting by the gate, head high, eyes alert. "Morning," Ethan greeted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The horse snorted softly, stepping closer. For a while, they simply stood together, watching the horizon blush with dawn. Clara appeared on the porch, hair loose around her shoulders. "You're heading out?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Just for a ride. Thought I'd check the west pasture." She studied him, then smiled. "You haven't said that in a long time." He shrugged, a quiet pride in his voice. "Feels like it's time to start again." When he mounted Spirit, the horse moved with effortless grace, muscles coiled and ready. The ranch looked different from this height, alive again. Every blade of grass seemed to shimmer, every sound richer. Ethan guided Spirit toward the open field, and together they broke into a gallop. The wind tore through his hair, carrying laughter he hadn't known he still had in him. As they raced across the land, Ethan felt the weight of the past loosening, falling away with every stride. Spirit's movements were fluid, a perfect harmony of strength and purpose. It wasn't just a ride, it was a reclamation. When they slowed near the ridge, Ethan looked toward the distant valley. He could almost see the faint shimmer of the waterfall through the morning haze. It was far away, yet somehow closer than ever. He dismounted, standing with one hand resting on Spirit's mane. "Thank you," he said softly, "for leading us there, for bringing him back." Spirit turned his head slightly, ears flicking, as if he understood. The wind lifted Ethan's words, carrying them toward the hills, where echoes of the past dissolved into light. Back at the house, Clara was in the corral, scattering feed. She looked up as Ethan approached, her eyes bright. "You look different," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally stopped fighting the wrong battles." They worked side by side through the morning, mending fences, checking the horses. The rhythm of ordinary life, once dull, now sacred, settled around them. By afternoon, clouds began to gather again, painting the sky in shades of gray and silver. Clara looked up. "Rain." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Seems fitting." When the first drops fell, Spirit lifted his head, nostrils flaring. the air filled with that same earthy scent as before, sharp and sweet. Ethan and Clara stood together, faces turned toward the sky. The rain came harder, washing the dust from the fields, running down their skin in cool rivulets. For a moment, Ethan thought he heard something beneath the storm's rhythm, a faint, distant echo of a waterfall, or perhaps just the whisper of memory. Either way, it no longer hurt. It only reminded him that life still flowed, endlessly beautifully. By evening, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The ranch glistened in the fading light, every surface shimmering with water and gold. Spirit stood at the fence again, his coat darkened and shining. Ethan walked up to him, resting his hand between the horse's eyes. "You've done your part," he murmured. "If you need to go, I'll understand." Spirit's ears twitched, but he didn't move. His breath came steady and calm, and for a moment Ethan thought he might stay. Then, with a low snort, Spirit turned toward the open field and began to walk away, slowly at first, then faster, until his figure melted into the horizon. Clara came to stand beside Ethan, her hand finding his. "He's not gone," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "No, he's just free." They stood watching until Spirit's silhouette disappeared completely into the dimming light. The world was silent again, but the silence was full, alive, at peace. When they finally turned back toward the house, the last streaks of daylight brushed the land in hues of gold and rose. The air smelled of rain and renewal. Ethan looked once more toward the horizon, where Spirit had vanished. "He'll find his way," he whispered. Clara smiled through the quiet. "So will we." And as the night settled over the ranch, the faint echo of water still lingered somewhere far beyond the hills, a gentle reminder that love, once found, never truly fades, only changes shape and flows on forever.